My daughter changed her last name to her stepfather's name secretly. When I found out at her wedding and confronted her, she said, "I took the best name for myself and you have no right to complain." I quietly left the wedding. But what happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to John Martins from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I used to believe I was doing the right thing. You know the kind of belief I'm talking about. The one that keeps you moving even when your gut is clenched and your heart's whispering that something's off. For me, that belief came wrapped in business suits, red-eye flights, and hotel keycards. I was a father, yes, but I was also a provider. And in my head, those two things were one and the same. After Lila's mother walked out when she was barely 6, I swore I'd never let her feel that kind of abandonment again. So I worked harder, stayed later, missed parent-teacher conferences, ballet recitals, Saturday morning pancakes, all in the name of building a life she'd never have to struggle in. I thought success could wrap around her like armor. But now, looking back, I realize I was building a fortress with me on the outside. There were warning signs, sure, but they were easy to ignore when you're halfway across the country and buried in quarterly reports. When she was 12, Lila asked me, casually, like it was no big deal, if it was okay to call Darren Dad sometimes. Darren, her mother's new husband, was a school counselor with soft eyes and a laugh that sounded like a warm summer day. I didn't like the man, but he'd never been cruel or unkind, just present. That was enough. I remember freezing in that hotel room in Dallas, the Bluetooth headset in my ear and a spreadsheet on my screen, and saying, "If that's what makes you comfortable, kiddo." My voice barely cracked. I told myself it was just a phase, that teenagers always tested the waters. I convinced myself that she'd grow out of it. I didn't ask again. That was my mistake. There's a funny thing that happens when you miss the little moments. You start telling yourself you're still part of the big ones. So when Lila got engaged and called to tell me, I poured a whiskey and toasted alone in my kitchen. I offered to pay for the honeymoon, gave her the deed to the family's old beach house as a wedding gift, and spent hours writing a toast I planned to give at the reception. It talked about our shared memories, road trips, midnight snacks, the time we both got food poisoning from a diner off I-75. I wanted to remind her that no matter how far I was still her father. That blood wasn't optional. That love, even the kind that shows up late, still counts. I spent weeks rehearsing those words in my head, imagining the moment I'd raise my glass and she'd look at me and remember who held her hand through every flu and heartbreak, even if it was over FaceTime. But the moment I stepped into the venue, something shifted. It was the details, the name Whitmore, etched in cursive on the welcome board, engraved on champagne flutes, stitched into napkins. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, a coincidence. Maybe they were just using it informally. But when I picked up the wedding program and saw Lila Grace Whitmore, printed like a bold declaration of loyalty, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. The legal documents, the license, the guest book, everything confirmed it. My last name, the one I'd carried, the one I'd passed down with pride and sacrifice, had been scrubbed out like chalk on a rainy sidewalk. I stood there, stunned, while distant cousins made small talk and photographers clicked away like nothing was wrong. Like I wasn't a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. It wasn't rage that hit me first. It was a kind of hollow, aching disbelief. I found her just behind the banquet hall, touching up her makeup with one of her bridesmaids. She looked radiant, glowing in a way that nearly made me forget why I was there. I pulled her aside gently. "Lila," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper, "you changed your name?" She looked at me with a calmness that I still haven't fully forgiven. No guilt, no hesitation, just a smile and a shrug. "I took the best name for myself," she said, "and you have no right to complain." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a single sentence that split me in two. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She was resolute. And I suddenly understood that somewhere along the way, I had become a footnote in my own family story. I walked out before the first dance. I didn't say goodbye, didn't wait for dessert. I got in my car, loosened my tie, and drove home in silence. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart was a wreck. I thought about every birthday I'd missed, every Sunday call I'd postponed, every "I'm proud of you" I'd texted instead of saying in person. I thought about the name I'd given her, not just the syllables, but the history behind it. My father, a carpenter who worked with hands that never stopped shaking from old war injuries. My grandfather, who built our home brick by brick after the Great Depression. That name wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and she discarded it like a coat that no longer fit. I don't know how long I sat in the driveway once I got home. The engine off, the porch light flickering. But by the time I stepped inside, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep giving to someone who had decided I no longer existed. The toast sat in the inside pocket of my suit jacket, printed on cream paper I had folded neatly the night before. I'd stayed up late crafting it, rewriting phrases, and trying to strike the perfect balance between sentiment and restraint. It opened with a joke, something light about how Lila once tried to make pancakes using salt instead of sugar, and the kitchen smelled like feet for a week. Then I'd talk about the years, the little things, the late-night phone calls after her first breakup, the time I drove 4 hours after a conference just to see her perform in her school's winter concert even though she didn't know I was there. I wrote it all down, those pieces of our life that I thought mattered. I thought I was being sentimental, thoughtful. But now, with the truth of her name change hardening in my chest, the words I'd so carefully chosen felt like a eulogy for something that had already died. I sat at the reception table, watching her twirl on the dance floor with Darren, the man she had chosen as her father in everything but DNA. I couldn't stop comparing our shoes. He wore polished brown loafers. Mine were black with a faint scuff on the toe. He had perfect posture and easy conversation, and everyone seemed to know him like they'd been rehearsing his introduction for years. Every smile he got felt like one I was owed. I was the man who taught her to ride a bike, who stayed on the line for 2 hours when she called me crying after her first college final, who answered every "Can you send me some money?" without a second thought. But that night, I was just a donor, of jeans, of money, of silence. I caught her eyes once. Just once. She was laughing, mid-spin, the lights making her dress shimmer like something out of a movie. For a brief second, her smile faltered. Maybe she saw the pain in my eyes. Maybe she recognized what I hadn't said yet. Or maybe she didn't see me at all. Either way, she turned back to her dance partner, and that was that. I pulled the toast from my pocket and stared at it. The words looked small, childish. "You've always been my greatest success," I had written. But in that moment, it felt like a lie. Because what success ends with the one you love most pretending you never existed? I excused myself and made my way to the back corridor of the venue, where the air was cooler and the music more muffled. I found her alone briefly, touching up her lipstick in a mirror mounted on the hallway wall. "Lila," I said. Her name felt foreign in my mouth. She turned, startled but composed. "Hey, Dad," she said quickly, too quickly, like she was still testing how it sounded. I went straight to the point. "You changed your name? Legally?" She looked at me, blinking once, then nodded. "I thought you knew." I shook my head slowly. "When? Why?" She didn't hesitate. 2 years ago, right after the engagement. I wanted a clean start. Darren's always been constant. The word stung, more than she realized. I wanted to yell. I wanted to demand to know if those 20 years with me had meant nothing. But instead, I said nothing. Her next sentence was the nail in the coffin. "I took the best name for myself, and you have no right to complain." There was no apology, no softness, no awareness of the blow she'd just delivered. And maybe that was the hardest part. Not the name itself, but the way she stripped it from me with surgical coldness, like it had never meant anything in the first place. I looked at her. My daughter, my legacy, and felt like I was staring at a stranger. She had Darren's name, Darren's values, Darren's smile. But what about me? What about the man who put his own dreams on hold so she could chase hers? I left her standing there. Didn't wait for her to follow. Didn't turn around. The music swelled behind me. Laughter echoed down the hallway, and I walked out of the venue like a ghost. Outside, The night was warm and too quiet. I got in my car and drove. I didn't even remember how I made it home, but I know the silence was heavier than any argument could have been. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen I once held her in after her first fever broke, and I looked at the photo of us on the fridge. She was 8 in that picture, missing a front tooth, her arms wrapped around my neck like she never wanted to let go. I stared at that image for a long time, trying to reconcile it with the woman who just told me I had no right to complain. The toast was still in my pocket. I unfolded it again. Read it once. Then I took a match from the drawer and lit the corner of the page. I watched it curl and blacken, the ink twisting into smoke, until there was nothing left but ash. That was the last gift I ever planned to give her. My words, my love and language, and she wouldn't even know she'd never hear them. That moment, standing alone in my dark kitchen with the scent of burnt paper in the air, was when I made my decision. If she didn't want my name, she wouldn't get anything else that came with it. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the sunrise from my kitchen window, the same spot where I once taught Lila how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl. I remembered how she used to sit on the counter, legs swinging, asking if I thought Santa Claus was real. That same child, now a woman, had looked me dead in the eyes and told me I had no right to complain about her erasing my name from her life. That sentence kept looping in my head like a bad commercial. No right to complain. She could have said she was sorry. She could have said it was complicated. But she didn't. She stood there like my name meant nothing more than a placeholder until a better offer came along. And the worst part? She truly believed it. That morning, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or punch a wall. I just started taking back what was mine. The honeymoon was the first thing to go. I had paid for it months ago. 5-star resort in Maui, full itinerary, ocean view suite. I remembered the day I booked it, smiling like a fool because I thought I was giving her a memory she'd never forget. And in a way, I did. I logged into the booking account, clicked through the reservation details, and canceled the entire trip with a single keystroke. There was a small cancellation fee, but I didn't care. The rest of the balance refunded to my card within minutes. It felt surgical, clean, like excising a rotten tooth. I didn't feel satisfaction, just resolve. If she wanted Darren's name, she could ask him to take her on a honeymoon. I was done paying for memories I wasn't allowed to be a part of. Then came the house. The beach house had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his bare hands, plank by plank. He named it Sea Haven and carved that into a driftwood sign that still hung over the front door. I spent every summer of my childhood there. Lila loved it too. She learned to swim in the cove behind it, scraped her knees climbing the rocky path, picked seashells, and lined them along the windowsills like treasure. 6 months before her wedding, I transferred the deed to her as a surprise. I thought I was passing down a legacy. But that morning, all I saw was a symbol of my own foolishness. I called my lawyer, told him I needed the transfer reversed. It wasn't easy. Technically, it was a gift. But the paperwork hadn't been finalized by the county office yet. He pulled some strings. By the end of the week, Sea Haven was mine again. I didn't call to explain. I didn't send a message. I knew she'd find out soon enough. I didn't expect the fallout to come so fast. It started with a voicemail from her new husband. His voice was stiff, controlled. Hey, Mr. Wallace. Lila's really upset. We noticed the honeymoon was canceled, and we just got a notice from the title office about the house. Look, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding, but maybe we can talk. I didn't return the call, not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to say. The second voicemail was from Darren. Darren, he had the audacity to say, I know you're hurting, but punishing her like this isn't right. She didn't mean to disrespect you. I deleted that one halfway through. I didn't need life lessons from the man who took my place at every family dinner I missed. If he wanted the fatherhood title so badly, he could start paying the price that came with it. It was Lila's voice on the third call that made me pause. Not because she apologized, she didn't, but because of what she said. You're punishing me for loving the man who actually showed up. That one sentence hit harder than all the rest. Because it was true, in a way. Darren was there. He went to her recitals. He helped with school projects. He stood next to her in photos where I should have been. And while I was grinding in boardrooms and airports, He was giving her the kind of presents I thought I could substitute with wire transfers and birthday gifts. But what she didn't understand, what she refused to understand, was that every hour I missed was spent trying to secure her future. Every sacrifice I made was for her. And now she stood on the other side of all that, rewriting the story as if I was just some absentee donor who didn't earn the title of father. She made her choice. I was finally making mine. Family, of course, didn't take it well. News spread like wildfire, as it always does when people need a distraction from their own mess. My sister called first. "You can't just disown your daughter because she changed her name," she said, as if this was about letters on a driver's license. "You're being vindictive." I asked her if she'd be okay with her son erasing her from his life. She didn't answer. My mother, bless her, tried to play the peacemaker. "She's young, dear. People make mistakes." But this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A conscious, deliberate choice to rewrite who I was in her life. And I was done funding a story I no longer belonged in. That night, I sat in the living room, lights dimmed, staring at the empty fireplace. Gerald came over, my best friend for over 30 years, and we shared a bottle of scotch in silence for the first half hour. Then he finally spoke. "You did everything for her, man. Doesn't mean she sees it. Doesn't mean she ever will." I looked at him, my throat dry. "Do you think I'm wrong?" He leaned back, shook his head slowly. "No. I think you finally stopped letting people love you for the wrong reasons." That line stuck with me. Because he was right. I spent years buying forgiveness, bribing connection, paying rent on a relationship that had no foundation left. But now I was evicting myself. From her life. From the fantasy that blood guarantees love. From the lie that being present through money could ever replace being present in person. I underestimated how fast betrayal travels. How quickly people who never returned your calls suddenly find time to call you when they think they've found a new angle to judge. The first real fallout hit on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after I canceled the honeymoon and reclaimed the house. I was sitting at my desk, sorting through paperwork, when my phone began vibrating with messages. Not just from Lila or her new husband, but from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, high school friends of hers I didn't even know she still talked to, and, strangely, even her godmother, who once forgot her birthday entirely, but now had the gall to leave a voicemail calling me cruel and emotionally unstable. People were enraged not because I'd done something monstrous, but because I'd quietly taken back gifts they all believed she was entitled to. In their minds, she was the bride, the daughter, the victim of a father's tantrum. But none of them had stood in that hallway with her. None of them had heard her say that I had no right to complain. The public fallout came next. Lila's college roommate posted a cryptic status on social media, something vague but pointed. "It's sad when parents can't handle their kids' happiness unless it centers them." It got likes, comments, little nods of support from people who didn't know me, didn't care to. Then came the subtweets, the Instagram stories from the wedding with captions like, "Surrounded by love, even when some can't give it." I knew who they were about. Of course I did. And still, I said nothing. Not a single public post. Not a word in defense. I'd spent my whole life building a reputation that didn't need defending from people who only knew my story in fragments. Let them think what they wanted. They'd never sat in my kitchen at 3 a.m. wondering if they were doing enough. They'd never skipped anniversaries and birthdays and vacations for the kind of job that barely leaves you breathing, but pays for college and braces and rent. I had nothing left to prove. But the worst part of it, the part that still knots in my stomach when I think about it, was how easily people believed I was disposable. That my absence during certain years made everything else void. That a girl could grow up in the home I paid for, eat the food I put on the table, enjoy the safety net I bled to provide, and then tell me, with a straight face, that I had no right to complain. I wanted to scream, to call each and every person who chimed in with their little opinions and ask them where they were when I was working 16-hour days to cover private school tuition. I wanted to ask them if they'd ever had to miss their daughter's birthday to save her future. But I didn't. Because I knew the answer. They hadn't. And they never would. One night, maybe a week after the wedding, Lila finally showed up at my door. She wasn't alone. Darren was with her, of course, standing slightly behind like some moral bodyguard. She didn't knock. She rang the doorbell 3 times, fast and sharp, like she was trying to summon a confrontation rather than a conversation. I opened the door but didn't step aside to let them in. She looked tired, makeup smeared, eyes red. "You're seriously going to cut me off because I changed my last name?" she asked, her voice trembling but her tone still laced with defiance. I didn't respond, just looked at her. And when she realized I wasn't going to answer the question the way she wanted, she pushed harder. "You're punishing me for something that isn't even about you." That broke the dam. "You think this is about a name?" I snapped. The calm I'd held on to for days cracked in my throat. "You think this is about syllables and letters? You erased me, Lila. You made a choice, not just to honor someone else, but to bury me in the process. And then you stood there, in your wedding dress, and told me I had no right to feel anything about it. That's not a name change. That's a funeral." Darren started to step forward like he was going to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." I didn't need his therapist's tone or some lecture about emotional maturity. This wasn't his scene to narrate. Lila blinked. Her face twitched, some combination of hurt and disbelief. "You didn't even try to understand," she said. "You just walked away." That hurt. But not because it was true, because it wasn't. I had spent years trying to understand, trying to justify her choices, trying to tell myself that she was young, that this was just a phase, that maybe she'd come back around. But when she told me, I didn't matter. Not just once, but in every decision leading up to that wedding, I finally stopped waiting. "I walked away," I said, "because I finally realized I wasn't invited to the life you built." I shut the door. Softly. Not a slam. Just a quiet, final click. Later that week, my younger cousin Marcus called. He was 25, working 2 jobs, still living in a 1-bedroom apartment with his fiancée and newborn daughter. "I heard what happened," he said carefully. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Also, if you're serious about finding someone to watch over the beach house, I'd be honored." That call surprised me, not because of the offer, but because it reminded me that not everyone saw me as a villain. Some people still remembered the things I'd done quietly, consistently. I drove to the house the next day, gave Marcus the keys, and told him to make it a home. His fiancée cried when I handed her the paperwork, said she'd never lived near the ocean before. It was the first time in weeks I felt something close to peace. The lawyer's office was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was just the mood I carried in with me like a storm cloud. I'd been there before, years ago, when I set up the first version of my will. Back then, everything had gone to Lila, straightforward, no contingencies, no questions. My home, my savings, the beach house, the stocks I'd quietly built up over decades of sleepless nights and missed milestones. At the time, it seemed obvious. Who else would it go to? She was my daughter. My only child, my legacy. But now, sitting in that same leather chair across from a man who barely looked up from his screen, I realized how much could change in a single sentence, a single decision. "We'll need to update the beneficiaries," I told him. My voice didn't shake. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. He typed something, asked me a few questions, clinical, efficient. Who would I like to include instead? Did I want to leave anything to charity? Any instructions for personal items? It all felt strangely transactional for something so final. I named Gerald, my best friend. Marcus and his new family. A scholarship fund in my father's name, aimed at helping kids from working-class families who wanted to study carpentry. And that was it. No mention of Lila. No just in case she comes around clause. No secret stash tucked away for a moment of reconciliation. I wasn't building a trapdoor for regrets. I was sealing the door shut. Because a legacy isn't just about blood. It's about who stood with you when things cracked and who showed up to help rebuild. When I left the office, freshly printed and notarized, I didn't feel victorious. There was no cinematic music swelling in the background. Just a hollow kind of quiet. A strange relief. Like closing the final page of a book you once loved, but could no longer read without feeling angry. I drove back home. Took the long route past Lila's old elementary school, the frozen yogurt place we used to go to after her spelling bees, the park where she learned to ride her bike. Each stop was like a bruise I pressed just to see if it still hurt. It did, but I kept driving anyway, because pain has a funny way of showing you where you've healed and where you never really will. Later that night, I opened the old box in my closet where I'd kept all her childhood drawings. They were still there, crumpled finger paint sketches, shaky handwriting that said, "To Daddy," with backward letters, school crafts made with macaroni and glitter. I sat with them for a long time, spread out on my living room floor like artifacts from another life. I wondered what she would think if she saw them now. Would she even recognize the girl who made them? Would she remember how proud she used to be of her last name? Or was that, too, just another version of herself she'd chosen to shed? I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad exactly. Just tired. Tired of holding on to things that only one of us still cared about. The phone didn't ring much after that. People stopped checking in. The gossip died down. I became a ghost to the family circles, and honestly, I didn't mind. I started spending more time with Marcus and his little girl, Ava. She called me uncle at first, but eventually, one day at the beach house, she slipped and called me grandpa. I didn't correct her. Marcus looked at me, eyes wide with apology, but I just smiled and told him to let it be. It didn't matter what she called me. What mattered was how it felt. And it felt real. It felt like family. Not the kind that takes you for granted, but the kind that looks at you like you're a gift. The kind I hadn't known I needed until the moment it arrived. One afternoon, while fixing a broken cabinet in the kitchen of the beach house, Marcus asked me if I thought Lila would ever come around. "You think she'll regret it?" he said, cautiously, like stepping on glass. I thought about it. I really did. I imagined her older, married a few years, maybe with kids of her own. Would she look at them and finally understand what it cost to give everything and still be forgotten? Maybe, but maybe not. Regret isn't my responsibility, I told him. My only job now is to protect the peace I've built. That's what it came down to in the end. Not revenge, not bitterness, just peace. Because after a lifetime of giving without question, I'd finally learned how to give to myself. Before I left that evening, Ava handed me a seashell. "You can keep this," she said. "So you remember us." I held it like it was gold. She didn't know it, but that shell meant more than any toast I could have given at a wedding, more than any gift I'd withdrawn. It was proof that something good had grown from the ashes. That legacy could look like a smile from someone who actually wanted you in their life, not out of obligation, but out of love. I kept that shell in my pocket the whole way home. The letter started with her name, Lila Wallace. Not Whitmore. Not whatever she might sign now. Just the name I gave her. I wrote it slowly, deliberately, like I was reclaiming a piece of history one letter at a time. The paper was thick, off-white, the kind I reserved for serious things. I sat at the kitchen table, same chair I'd occupied through late-night budget spreadsheets and cold cups of coffee, and began writing not because I hoped she'd read it, but because I needed to get the weight of it out of me. There are some things too heavy to carry in silence, and I'd been holding this grief like a stone in my chest for too long. The letter was never about changing her mind. It was about releasing mine. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, though that wasn't entirely true. Anger still lingered around the edges, like smoke after a fire's long gone cold. But what had replaced it, what had finally settled into my bones, was understanding. Not of her decision, but of mine. I admitted, in black ink and full sentences, that I had failed in ways she probably didn't even realize. That I had been gone more than I should have been. That I confused provision with presence. That there were years where she grew and I wasn't there to witness it, and no amount of tuition checks or birthday gifts could fill that absence. I didn't write those words to excuse her, but to acknowledge the part one played in the distance that had quietly grown between us. Distance I ignored because I thought love was stronger than time. It wasn't. But I also told her that names carry more than sound. They carry history, legacy, sacrifice. The name she shed was built from men who never had much, but gave everything. My father, who spent his life working with trembling hands to keep food on our table. My grandfather, who came home from war and never once complained, not even when his knees gave out on the stairs. These weren't perfect men, but they were men who carried their name with pride, who passed it down like a torch. And when she let it go so carelessly, she didn't just walk away from me. she walked away from them too. That's what hurt the most. Not the change itself, but the ease of it. Like none of it mattered. Like we were footnotes in her story rather than the first chapter. I told her, gently but firmly, that she had made her choice. And choices come with consequences, not as punishment, but as reality. You cannot erase someone and expect their love to keep flowing uninterrupted. I wasn't an ATM. I wasn't a placeholder for the man who showed up to school plays. I was her father. And she had buried that role with a few legal forms and a wedding program. I told her I canceled the honeymoon because I couldn't stomach the idea of funding a celebration that I was no longer truly part of. I reclaimed the house because it held memories, sacred ones, and I wouldn't let them be inherited by someone who no longer claimed the family it came from. I rewrote the will because legacies aren't given. They're earned. And I'd rather give mine to people who remember the weight behind what they're receiving. As I wrote, I realized that I didn't need her to understand. Not anymore. I didn't need validation or reconciliation or some tearful reunion where everything got magically fixed. That's the fantasy people cling to, the idea that one day, the people who hurt you will come back wiser, softer, full of apologies. But life rarely grants such scenes. And even if she did show up one day, letter in hand, saying she finally understood, it wouldn't undo the years of silence, the sting of that wedding hallway, the sound of my name being quietly replaced. No, I wasn't waiting for closure from her. I was giving it to myself. I signed the letter Dad, not because she still called me that, but because it's who I was. It's who I will always be, even if no one else ever says it again. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and slid it into the top drawer of my desk, where it remains, sealed, unsent. Some things are meant to be said, even if no one hears them. That letter is my truth. My goodbye. My reminder that I gave all I could, and when it no longer mattered, I walked away with dignity intact. Weeks passed, then months. Lila didn't call, didn't write. I stopped checking my phone for her name. Stopped expecting her to appear in my inbox with explanations. Instead, I poured my energy into the people who stayed. Gerald, Marcus, Ava. We built new traditions. Sunday dinners. Beach weekends. I taught Ava how to skip rocks across the water like I once taught Lila. The first time she got one to bounce, she screamed with pride, then ran over and threw her arms around me. "You're the best," she said. And for the first time in years, I believed it. Not because of her words, but because of the joy I saw reflected in her eyes. Uncomplicated. Unconditional. I still think about Lila sometimes. Not with rage or sorrow, but with something quieter. A mourning of what could have been. A memory of the little girl with glitter on her cheeks and crayons in her fists. She's not gone. She's just elsewhere, living a life that no longer includes me. And that's okay. We each have to live with the choices we make. I've made mine, and I've made peace with it. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because they no longer saw your worth? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. If this story spoke to something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-life family dramas that don't shy away from the messy truth. Your support helps bring these stories to light, and you never know who might need to hear them. See you soon in the next story.